Hello, everybody. Welcome back to class. It's Bram Duffee talking about human communication. And this week, we're going to be talking about nonverbal communication. And I brought in some extra resources for us to look at and think about as we get into this topic. And the first thing that you might notice is that in this unit, I uploaded some slides, and the title of the slides are called Faces. And one of the things that this slideshow really shows off are all of the different faces that you can make to show expression. My visits to different libraries get sort of exciting. And sometimes when I find a book that I really like, I will scan it and order it, for myself. And there is this, I'm not an artist at all, but one of the books that I found was a book that teaches folks how to sketch a face. And it really helps with facial expressions. This book is by Gary Fagan, and it's called The Artist's Complete Guide to Facial Expression. And what I did was I went through and I um, took clips so that you could see the facial expressions and how they dramatically match up to emotion. Can we see this child's face here? And just imagine the nonverbal expressions that come over that child's face. And the fact is that this, a lot of times for us, is very genuine. And that's why nonverbal communication is considered to be the more trustworthy thing that folks look at when they're trying to figure you out. So if you say the word yes but your facial expression says no, they're going to believe no. And so as we become more self-aware through childhood, we learn how to moderate our facial expressions. But there are lots of times when there are micro expressions that come across our face, especially early on defining information, that make it really difficult to mask ourselves from the genuine emotion that we have. Some examples are that are very easy to pick up are the look of disgust. The look of disgust is almost always involving the nose turning up. And so if someone walks into a room that someone else hates and they notice them, then that first second when you see them make the connection that that person just entered, you could have that person in a vulnerable spot to be able to figure out what they think of that person, right? Because the look of disgust might pop on their face, or the look of attraction might come up on that person's face. And so those are the times when there is a vulnerability that nonverbal expressions can really do damage. And they're a big tell. One of the ways that it's a tell is in lie detection. I teach a class on lie detection where we spend a lot of time looking at nonverbal expressions and how the expressions that come across our face and the way that we are positioning our body really shows confidence or shows deceit or can show all kinds of different emotions. And the quick trip on that before we get into our full lesson today is just that there are micro expressions that we look for that someone has, especially during an interview or during a time where they're being asked directly about what you're trying to figure out. And you see how they answer questions normally, and then you see how they answer questions that are related to your topic. And the uh, micro expressions that are put off by that person directly after the questions asked are supposed to be a real potential tell. So it's fun to think about how nonverbal expressions do make a difference, and they are the genuine ourselves that get shown off sometimes. We can't always fake smile and be believed. And so this is all stuff to consider. Now, I want to get into our talk on communication today, but this time I have a different way to present the presentation. So what I'm going to do is set us up so that you can see the same slides that I see. So let's get you fixed up for us. Mhm. Perfect. All right. Let's talk about the ways that we connect with others. And what sometimes, unfortunately, gets in the way. I want you to think about a time when you've had a conversation that felt sort of effortless. And it was just one of those conversations where you got each other and you're on the same page. And then, gosh, compare that to a moment where you felt like no matter what you said, the other person wasn't on the same page. Being in one of those two scenarios can really be an easy thing to find ourselves, because hindering communication sometimes has this pizzazz element. And one key process that helps communication is active listening. So imagine if you're telling a friend about a tough day and they put down their phone and look at you and nod and ask a thoughtful question about what you were talking about, that makes you feel heard. And on the flip side, when you're sharing something important and the person starts interrupting, gosh, that just makes it feel like you're hitting a brick wall. So there are these situations where you sometimes don't jive with someone. Sometimes it doesn't matter what you do, you can't figure out what obstacle you have to get over, but sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, sometimes it flows, sometimes it doesn't flow. And these different instances are always subjected to the fact that we have a human element dynamic at play, human behavior, and two different people with two different impressions. And um, what the goal is to find some kind of common ground. And a lot of times when we meet people to begin with and we start to figure out what that connection is, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for that common ground. Are you saying into the same music or sports, or into the same uh, television or topics of whatever, that these things would have a reason for you to be connected. Because if you can't find that, it's not any um, there's not a good way. And I have friends who are from other cultures, and because they're from other cultures, they specifically don't eat the way I do and can't have their food prepared the way I do. And these kinds of things uh, in themselves can be limiting. So we want to work to understand one another, because it's really crazy how misunderstandings can creep in. And sometimes it's just because someone has a certain impression of you that's not accurate, or vice versa. And so emotions do play a huge role. And so the goal here is to be calm and open, and that way it's easier to express yourself. But if you're, like nervous, stressed, or for goodness sakes, angry, this is the kind of thing that might block the flow of communication. So have you ever tried explaining your side of an argument, and at that time you're upset and emotionally charged? It's just a lot harder to find the words. Those words don't come out right. If this is a kind of barrier that we've all faced, and later on you have the perfect words, but at that moment they didn't come to you. And interpersonal communication isn't just about what we say, and it's because it's about how we say it. And some of that has to do with how we listen and the environment that we're in for that exchange to happen. And so an ordinary conversation isn't just an ordinary conversation anymore, because there are a lot more things at play. You know, I want to ask you, have you ever started telling a story and realized halfway through that you're following the same pattern or the same wording that you've used before? Well, that's an example of unconscious control in communication. And our brains love efficiency. So they work to create mental scripts. And these are like automatic guides on what to say and what to do based on experiences. And so, like, imagine being a cashier. And so, without giving it much thought, you might say, "Hi, how's it going?" And they respond, "Good, how about you?" Well, that exchange feels easy, and it's because it follows a script in your brain. And your brain has a list of other stored scripts for similar encounters, right? Now, the unconscious mode can help make routine conversations a lot more smooth. So, for instance, when you chat casually with a friend, maybe while you're scrolling through your phone, some scripts just automatically do run in the background. This is one of the things that allows you to multitask. But there is a catch because there are times when this autopilot sort of feature can backfire. And so, for example, have you ever caught yourself saying something inappropriate or out of place because you just weren't paying full attention? Yeah, see, that's the downside of letting those kinds of scripts take over. On the flip side, conscious control in communication is something that becomes crucial when the stakes are higher. So think about delivering maybe a heartfelt apology, or if you're having a tough conversation with a loved one. Here, you're probably planning your words carefully. Like, it's not just choosing something at random. You want to make sure that message lands right. So, conscious control helps you adjust, course correct, and even pause if emotions flare up. Like, well, like for a job interview, you might start talking too much and then consciously steer yourself back to answering the question more clearly. Well, that maybe might help avoid an awkward ramble. But both of these kinds of modes, the unconscious mode and the conscious mode, they work together to balance how we communicate. So picture somebody trying to give directions while driving in an unfamiliar city. They can manage the basic greetings, those are like unconscious things, but they might rely on conscious control to help give clear and directions to avoid misunderstandings. So communication is kind of like that. It's like finding this blend of natural flow, and also some bit of focused effort on what you need to say to truly connect with others, especially in changing moments. Now, how we communicate isn't just about what we say, it's about how we say it and the route or the channel that we choose. So each channel, whether it's speaking or writing or face to face kind of interaction, or maybe even a phone call, all of these bring strengths and challenges. So to make the most of them, it helps to understand when and why it might be better to work with one than the other. So let's talk about face to face. You know, the face to face communication is the gold standard for clarity. And so if we think about resolving a disagreement with a friend and doing that in person, that allows you to read their facial expressions and hear their tone of their voice and use your body language to respond, like nodding or leaning in. These are communication clues that work to create an emotional connection. And it does make it easier to hash out complex ideas or smooth over conflicts. So we contrast that with a text argument. Gosh, that's where someone might misunderstand some kind of harmless sarcasm. It's just anger. And words alone can't always carry the full emotional weight of a message. Now, the phone is an interesting middle ground, right? So imagine that you get a call from a family member who lives far away. Well, you can pick up on their tone. You might notice that they sound excited or concerned, but you miss out on their facial expressions or gestures. So, even so, the phone can be an incredibly efficient way to do quick problem solving. Like, have you ever been late and called someone to help rearrange some kind of plans? It's just faster than a long text and it avoids the delay of written communication. So there are benefits, right? And speaking of writing, it's true that writing is the most challenging channel for accuracy, which is strange because it's something put down on black and white. But if we think about all the times that things have gone wrong over email or social media posts, um, they don't have tone, pause, or visual kinds of clues. So the reader relies on the words that you chose, and that's it. So, how many emojis can you use to correctly give the message that you want to give? It's just we use these kinds of things because we're trying to make up for the lack of personal touch, and sometimes that's gets stripped away. On a positive side, writing is an excellent way to leave a clear record, like when you confirm appointments or follow up professionally. Um, Choosing the right channel can really make or break a message. So if you need instant feedback or if there's an emotional nuance, it's just that face to face or phone probably works best. And if you're documenting something that's important, writing is probably the go to. It's just all about playing to the strengths of each channel and knowing that sometimes it's not what you say, but how you say it. And that's what makes a difference. Have you ever been in a situation where someone said all of the right things, but something about their body language just didn't match? Well, maybe they said, I'm fine, but their crossed arms and lack of eye contact just told you a different story. And so that's the power of body language. It is something that reveals emotions and intentions. And often it can show more honesty than words can. So our gestures, and facial expressions, and even posture often communicate more than we realize. I want you to think about how you naturally wave at a friend to catch their attention, or you raise your eyebrows when you're surprised. These automatic signals that add meaning to your words, or sometimes they stand entirely on their own. So imagine watching someone shrug, right? Even without words, that's a gesture that says, I don't know, or I don't care, right? So body language also gives emotional color to your conversations. Picture a job interview. You're explaining your qualifications and you are able to feel confident there. But if you have a slouched posture and your legs are moving around, then it's just not going to show that same confidence. So the interviewer might pick up on that and just think, gosh, this is a nervous person or this is an unprepared person. But on the flip side, standing tall, leaning in, and maintaining eye contact, showing your interest in what they're talking about, all of these help make your words have a stronger impact. And I think it's interesting that body language can operate with not that much conscious control. It's like when you're excited, your hands might naturally start gesturing in sync with your words. Or when you're nervous, tapping your foot might give you away, no matter how calm you try to appear. So these unconscious clues help listeners gauge how you're really feeling, even if you try to hide it. The thing about body language is that it's really a two-way street. It's not just expressing your emotions, it also shapes how other people are reacting to you. So think about a professor who smiles and uses open gestures while lecturing. It makes the class atmosphere feel welcoming and engaging. And that's a big difference when you compare that to someone who's rigid and keeps their arms folded. Even if that material is interesting, the lack of warmth in their body language might make the lecture feel, well, distinct or just more intimidating. So mastering body language isn't just about being aware of your own signals. It's also about learning to read what others are showing you. So whether it's leaning forward, just showing that you have interest, or a quick glance over at the door that shows that you're bored, these are clues that you can adjust and guide conversations to create stronger, more meaningful connections. When we talk about nonverbal communication, there are different kinds of body language that we get into as far as labeling. And when we label body language that has to do with the body, um, that is a term called kinesics. And kinesics refers to gestures or any kind of movement that you do to illustrate something, your eye contact and your posture. These are the things that represent kinesics. And kinesics you can think of as just the body presentation, right? And that's one way that we think of nonverbal communication and one way we label it. So we remember kinesics is the body. Now, paralanguage is a different type of nonverbal communication that is focused on the actual words. So your voice, the pitch, the volume, the rate, the quality, the intonation, the vocalized pauses when you make pauses, these are another distinct part of nonverbal communication that we think of. And this is paralanguage of the voice. So we've talked about the body, which is kinesics. We talked about the voice, which is paralanguage. And now I want to mention space. Proxemics refers to space, and that's easy to see because proxemics is one of those areas that, well, we're talking about the proximity. It's just a version of the word. And when we think about proxemics, we are referring to the things that are in our personal space and how we make up that personal space. So, for example, how do I set up my office? How do I set up my bedroom? How much space do I have between myself and the person I'm talking to, and in what situation? And so it's how close I am to someone and the things that are in that area. The other mentionable when it comes to nonverbals is the self-presentation. We present ourselves in a way by dressing a certain way, by showing up at a certain time, by that kind of effort. So it also is an expression of your personal nonverbal communication to be dressed a certain way, to wear your hair a certain way, to have yourself out there the way that you do. So this is what we're talking about. Nonverbal communication is more than just words. It's how the words are said. It's in what context they're said in. It's how your body is positioned. It's the things around your environment, the space around your environment. So it's how It's how and who and what and all of those kinds of things, right? In summary, nonverbal communication is referring to everything except the actual words themselves. Interpreting body language is like learning a secret language that can tell you how someone really feels, even if they're not saying it out loud. And people often express more through their gestures and their postures and their expressions than they might with words. So, leaning to interpret these, learning to interpret these signals isn't just useful, it can help make or break your ability to connect with someone. Imagine sitting in a group project meeting and your team is brainstorming. One person keeps glancing at their phone with their arms crossed and the chair angled slightly away without saying anything. That body language screams, I would rather be somewhere else, right? And we contrast that with another team member that um, is engaged and nodding and making eye contact. These are the kinds of things that make sure that um, you're gauging your message. So, take body contact, for example. Um, Friends that gives a friendly pat on the back might suggest encouragement, right? But if someone invades your personal space without permission, that's something that could instead make you feel really uncomfortable. Or if we think about your body's orientation, when people face you directly, it typically means that they're engaged. I also know that posture matters a lot too. We think about someone who's slumping in their chair and not really fully engaged. That's the kind of uh, difference, right? Gestures just tell. And if we think about someone that's tapping their foot while they're waiting, that's something that is going to say, hey, I am impatient. If you're raising your hand, it signals that you want to contribute. If you cross your arms, it might show that you're uncomfortable or at the very least that you're cold. So let's just assume that you aren't cold. It's just a shame that you didn't have the forethought to present yourself in a way so that you were presenting yourself in an open, inviting way. Because if you aren't cold, then you just sort of close yourself off. People, even though you don't mean to, people do interpret what you give off. And so your gestures and your head nods and your vocal expressions, all of these things are clues that help paint a bigger picture. We know that folks don't just listen to what you say, they listen to all these other things, how you are heard and how they say it. Interpreting um, body language can feel like solving a puzzle because sometimes the picture isn't as clear as we would like for it to be. And the tricky thing about nonverbal message is that a nonverbal message isn't something that has a universal dictionary. A smile is something that could mean happiness or politeness or even nervous. It just depends on the situation. And that's why understanding body language takes a bit of skill and a whole lot of context to understand what's happening. I want you to picture this. You're in a group chat with friends, and you notice that one person isn't making any eye contact, and you're tempted to assume that they're upset or not interested. But gosh, they could just be tired after a long day. And we want to avoid jumping to conclusions. So it means that you need to look at multiple channels altogether, right? And so maybe they're just um, uh, showing one or two signs, and it means that they have to maybe be checked and say, hey, is there more to the story? And another principle is watching just to see if someone's words match their actions. Imagine your roommate saying, I'm fine, but at the same time, they just slammed a door or a cupboard. So those kinds of mixed messages are a classic case of incongruent body language. And this is something that often reveals the true feelings that someone has. So learning to balance what people say and how they act can work to help you address the real issue instead of just taking their words at face value. Context can just make all the difference as well, because a shrug in casual conversation might mean that they're indifferent. But in a tense meeting, in a tense environment, it could signify of an avoidance or a discomfort. The other thing is crossed arms. While it's often seen as defensive, that same posture, it's just causes the person's cold. So the environment or the situation also has to work to fill in some of the missing pieces of the nonverbal story. And another scenario to think about is when people say one thing but behave differently, right? So at a public speaking event, someone might claim to feel confident, but constantly shift their weight around to avoid eye contact. So if you see that kind of discrepancy, you might see, hey, this person does appear to be nervous. And so um, maybe they need encouragement. But it's just that ultimately, accuracy in interpreting body language comes down to slowing down and observing the person and how they normally present themselves, and by honing in on the skill to see what's going on now versus what's happening for them normally is one good way to help. I enjoyed talking about nonverbal communication today, and I look forward to you checking out some of the slides that I have in the book that I put over for you, and then also their discussion board for this week.